Good evening. After the resignation of Dame Cressida Dick at the end of last week, you could be forgiven for thinking things couldn't get much worse for the Metropolitan Police. But today, the Police Federation said morale had reached rock bottom, blaming the mayor for undermining the thousands of officers working tirelessly across the capital. The Commissioner stepped down from her role at the top following a series of crises engulfing the Met, including allegations of sexism and misogyny among some officers. Our political correspondent Simon Harris is outside the Mayor's temporary headquarters this evening. Simon, a real war of words between the politicians and the police today.
Yes, Ronke. Sadiq Khan argues that it's his job to stand up for Londoners, to hold the police to account, but also to support the police in what they do. But according to the Police Federation, his words and actions in the last week, not least his role in forcing the Commissioner, Dame Cressida, to resign, are having the opposite effect. The Federation says ordinary police officers overwhelmingly back the outgoing Commissioner and think it's the Mayor who's undermining public trust in the force. She might have lost the backing of London's mayor, but Dame Cressida Dick still has the support of many of London's police officers. 5 days after she resigned, saying Sadiq Khan left her no choice, the body representing more than 31,000 Met officers declared it had no faith in the mayor.
The rank and file are not happy with the way they're being portrayed to the public, and we feel it's inciting the public against us when it's not necessary. We are changing.
And you blame the mayor?
For some of the commentary, absolutely I do.
The mayor claims trust in the police among Londoners has been shattered. He wants whoever replaces Dame Cressida to have a plan to rapidly change what he sees as a toxic culture within the force. He spoke to me earlier today.
I think what's really important is for us not to allow sweeping generalisations made against the police because of the actions of officers caused by these deep cultural issues. That's why it's so important.
The Police Federation says you're to blame for that.
Well, I think it's really careful. What we don't do is have a situation where the current leader of the Police Federation and me as the mayor have these discussions and debates in the fora of the media. What I ask him to do is to respond to my request for a meeting for us to discuss this in the sensible way that we should be discussing this.
And do you think you and the Home Secretary can reach an agreement?
No, absolutely. Look, I think it's really important for the public to be reassured that the Home Secretary and I are united in our keenness to reduce further violent crime in our city.
The way Dame Cressida was forced out has infuriated some Conservative politicians. Today, the Prime Minister paid tribute to her.
I think the best thing I can say about Cressida Dick is that I think that over many, many years, I've known her for many years, she has played a remarkable role as the first female head of the Metropolitan Police. I thank her for all her service. It goes back a long time.
The hunt for the next head of Scotland Yard is underway, but finding a candidate acceptable to both the Mayor and the Home Secretary could be a challenge. The Mayor was keen to play down reports of a rift between him and the Home Secretary over the way Dame Cressida's resignation was handled. But he did admit he hadn't spoken to Priti Patel since it happened, although they have exchanged text. He said their officials were trying to arrange a meeting in the next few days, and he was really keen to work with Priti Patel to make sure they select the right candidate to be the next Commissioner, someone who will rebuild trust and confidence in the force at the speed the Mayor thinks is necessary.
Simon, a subject we will definitely be returning to. Thank you. Good evening. Like thousands of Londoners, Harry Batt went out to enjoy himself last weekend. He was at the world-renowned gay nightclub Heaven and after leaving was involved in a furious clash with a woman. He claims she insulted him with gay slurs, hit him in the head and left him bleeding in the street. Gay hate crime is on the rise in the capital, up 21% over the last 2 years. After reporting the attack to the police, he is yet to speak with an investigating officer. This report has images of that attack and the aftermath. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
Mate. A young gay man waiting for a night bus in the Strand is suddenly attacked by a woman he doesn't know. Moments earlier, he says she insulted him with a homophobic slur.
Some girl out of nowhere comes up to me. She starts hurling homophobic slurs directed towards me, getting aggressive at me. We say to her, you can't say those sorts of things, otherwise I'll end up calling the police, don't have to put up with this. and then she just starts punching me in the head.
No, get off him! No, get off him!
Harry's friends pulled the woman off him, but by now he was bleeding. The cut to his head had to be treated with surgical glue in Casualty. Abuse targeting London's LGBT communities appears to be on the increase. In 2019, before COVID, the police recorded more than 2,900 homophobic hate crimes in London. Last year, that had risen to more than 3,500. That's a rise of 21%, even though 3 months of 2021 were in full lockdown.
These are the tip of the iceberg of what LGBTQ plus people are experiencing now. And it goes to show that there is a lot of work that we need to do to build trust between the police and LGBTQ communities so that people feel safe and it's worth their while reporting these awful things that happen to them.
Scotland Yard says it's because the police are trusted, more crimes are reported. Jeremy Joseph runs Heaven and its sister club GAY. He's convinced there's a more aggressive atmosphere in the West End on Fridays and Saturdays.
On Friday night, 3 people attacked our queue wearing balaclavas. Police were about 50 metres away. They made chase, but the fact they're willing to attack people in the queue in front of police, that shows how bad it is on the streets at the moment.
Harry, who lives in Fulham, is a student on a placement with a pharmaceutical firm. He and his friends don't want what happened to him to make them feel frightened on a night out.
I feel angry because nobody should go on a night out with their friends, something that's meant to be a fun, enjoyable activity, and be attacked in this sort of way. You know, it's horrible.
The attack at the bus stop was in the early hours of Saturday morning. The police told us they're appealing for witnesses. Harry says he's still waiting to hear from the police. They haven't yet asked him for a statement. Simon Harris, ITV News, Fulham.
Good evening. For the last 6 weeks, City Hall and the government have been at loggerheads about how to finance Transport for London. Did the Mayor splash the cash on fare freezes before the pandemic, or is the government holding Londoners to ransom with its bailout demands? And why does it matter when new projects to improve roads, the underground and buses are all on hold or at risk of not happening at all while the stalemate continues? London Assembly members wrote to the Transport Secretary today to complain about what they call a paralysis. With more, here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Brent Cross flyover is showing its age and crying out for a very expensive makeover. The concrete structure is crumbling. It needs barriers to protect it from traffic. If a lorry hit one of the supports, it could be catastrophic. But repairs will cost £100 million. And if the government doesn't give TfL a long-term funding deal, the work could be in jeopardy.
Brent Cross is safe. The problem is, over time, what will happen is we'll have to start closing parts of that structure. You can imagine the impact to London if you started closing lanes around Brent Cross.
Ever since the start of the pandemic, TfL has relied on a series of government handouts to stay afloat. It's enough to keep the trains, tubes and buses running, but it's not enough to fix anything that's broken or pay for much-needed improvements to London's transport system. Improvements like new tube trains to replace clapped-out carriages on the Bakerloo line. If the money's not there, the order can't be placed. And there might be no way of funding additional step-free access schemes, vital to allow more disabled people to use the underground.
Putting lift shafts into these really old Victorian stations, these are really big projects that take a really long time. If we're not acting now to at least plan what stations are going to be made step-free next, we're setting ourselves up for a legacy of an inaccessible network.
In a rare show of cross-party unity, London Assembly politicians at City Hall have written a letter to the Transport Secretary saying a long-term deal is urgently needed.
I think that Grant Shapps is quite aware of that, and what he said is that he's quite prepared to pay the cost of COVID, but he's not prepared to pay the cost of calm, and that's the difference.
TfL is completely paralysed at the moment. We're hearing that the Commissioner is spending about 60% of his time looking at budgets, going through the negotiations with government, and that doesn't include all the other staff and civil servants involved.
There are encouraging signs that commuters are coming back in ever-increasing numbers, but money from fares alone will never be enough. The Mayor has warned that if a new long-term funding deal isn't agreed, the era of managed decline will arrive very soon.
Simon, a stalemate. What's it going to take to get it sorted?
Well, the current funding package for TfL ends in 2 days' time, so something has to happen before midnight on Friday. But whether that's going to be the long-term deal that everyone wants or just another interim bailout, it's hard to say. The Transport Commissioner, Andy Byford, says he's already rejected one deal because it's unacceptable, but he wouldn't give any details. We've tried talking to the Department for Transport today, but there's been no response and certainly no comment on that letter from the London Assembly. It was interesting to hear what Keith Prince said there about Grant Shapps prepared to pay for COVID, but not for Khan. You'd imagine a Conservative member of the London Assembly would be plugged into what Conservative ministers are thinking. And hearing that, I think it's hard to believe that a deal is imminent anytime soon, despite all the warnings of dire consequences from TfL and City Hall.
All right, Simon, we'll have to wait and see. Thank you.
Good evening. It has been at the centre of a financial crisis for almost 2 years. But tonight, ITV News London can reveal that Transport for London workers are in line for a record 8% pay rise. That's despite repeated attempts by the Mayor to secure billions in funding from the government. The hike is all part of a 4-year pay deal. And today, Sadiq Khan confirmed there are no plans to scrap the rise, which will cost the struggling organisation £100 million. Unions say it's needed to balance out the cost of living, but opponents of the Mayor believe the decision could cripple the service beyond repair. Here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
It's not been a great week for Tube passengers. They found out they're facing an inflation-busting fares increase. But for Tube workers, the week just got a lot better. They're in for a bumper pay rise.
Well, I'm a nurse, so maybe I shouldn't say what I think about that, really. In comparison to the pay rise that we've been offered, I'd find that a tad disappointing, really.
I think they've been through quite a lot recently, so I think they probably deserve a bit of a pay rise.
I think that's a bit of a joke, because I think, because TfL was in a lot of trouble.
I'm a teacher and we haven't had any pay rise this year. We've had to work through Corona.
Thanks to a 4-year pay deal, underground workers are guaranteed a pay rise of 0.2% above inflation, known as RPI plus 0.2. We won't know how much that is until next month, but it's expected to be more than last month's RPI of 7.8%. That means it will almost certainly be above 8%.
In actual fact, this is a deal the management did. They offered us this, a 4-year pay settlement back in 2020, and we accepted it in good faith and shook hands with them on it. So it's just a matter about honouring your agreement.
Tube drivers currently earn an average salary of £58,949 for a 35-hour week. That could go up by £4,716 to £63,665. Altogether, this pay rise will cost around £100 million. At a time when TfL is begging for taxpayers' money. It's already had more than £5 billion since the start of the pandemic, but it wants another £1.2 billion from the government this year to pay for essential repairs and upgrades.
TfL, or rather the Mayor, is going cap in hand to the government, looking for taxpayers' money to bail them out because their finances are so bad. Then the underground staff are getting all this increase. It's just, you couldn't make it up.
London Underground clearly didn't expect inflation to be this high when it signed the pay deal 3 years ago. But the company said it was binding. There is no viable alternative but to honour it. And the Mayor agreed.
We have agreements with our workers. We've got to abide by them. If we didn't abide by our agreements, nobody could trust agreements made with TfL.
You don't think this would be torn up?
No, I think when you make a deal, you've got to stick by the deal. Because if you don't, what confidence can either side have in relation to future deals done?
Around 15,000 London Underground workers will get the pay rise in April.
Simon, has there been any reaction from the government then?
Well, the Department for Transport has declined to comment, but this has come at a critical moment for TfL. Its latest interim funding agreement with the government expires at midnight tomorrow, so negotiations between the DfT and TfL over that extra £1.2 billion are at a delicate stage, and I'm told that the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps was pretty annoyed when he found out that TfL had locked itself into a deal with the unions that's going to cost £100 million. As we saw there, the Conservatives at City Hall are also angry. They accuse the Mayor, not surprisingly a Labour Mayor, of doing cosy deals with the unions. The unions, by contrast, are absolutely thrilled with the pay offer they secured. As one ASLEF insider put it to me, it shows the importance of being in a trade union.
I suspect we'll be hearing a lot more on this then. Thank you, Simon.